I am bringing you along as I take this mid-century style chest of drawers that I found in the garbage and turn it into something modern that I can sell for a profit. Hello, Katie here from Salvaged by K. Scott. If you are new here, I have been flipping furniture full-time for the past 6 years, and I am here making over one piece of furniture at a time. One, to save it from contributing to the millions of tons of furniture waste that ends up in our landfills every year. And two, to show you how I do it and hopefully give you some ideas for your own furniture, whether you are an avid DIYer or have your own refinishing business. My favorite place to find furniture to make over is at the curb, waiting for the garbage truck, which is exactly where I found this little chest of drawers. And I can see why it was there. The top drawer front is completely busted off. It's got a peeling paint job. It's missing all of its hardware. This laminate top is water damaged and swollen, and it looks like it's been sitting outside for a while. This all seems pretty bad, but I'm just going to work through it one problem at a time, and I'm sure with a little bit of tender loving care, I can turn it back into a useful piece of furniture. I'm going to start by flipping the dresser over so that I can unscrew this base. I really love the shape of it, but I want to sand off this faux wood finish to get back to the natural wood. And while I've got it upside down, I guess I may as well unscrew this pressboard top. With the corner of this being as swollen as it is, I don't think it's worth any sort of attempt to save it. I'm just going to replace it with a new piece of 3/4 inch plywood. I'm also going to pry off all of these decorative panels from the drawer fronts. I'm just tucking my flathead screwdriver in where I can see any little gaps and then tapping it in a little further with my hammer so that I can get some leverage and get these off of the little finishing nails that are holding them on. And then I just grabbed those with my needle nose pliers and pulled them right out of the wood. I suppose I should also vacuum up all of these grass clippings and cobwebs, and then I'm just going to scrub everything down inside and out with some simple green to remove as much of the dirt and grease as I can. I found it in the garbage, so yuck. But getting up close and personal with a piece like this while I'm cleaning it really helps me to get into all of the nooks and crannies, and I find a lot of hidden damage or repairs that I need to address this way. I checked out all of the nylon drawer guides and runners inside the dresser, and they all seem to be in really good working order. But the bottom of this drawer that is missing its front is full of staples that aren't even holding it together. So I am just going to pluck these out and then hammer in a few nails once I get the front piece back on here. And to fix this front, it's actually not as bad as it seems. I used a box cutter to scrape away any old glue from the dovetails. And then I have this little glue syringe that was still full of glue from my last project to make sure that all of the surfaces on these joints have some fresh glue. Then it's just a matter of fitting everything back together. And I clamped it up once I had everything back together so that those joints could dry in place. Next, I need to do some sanding. So I grabbed the base and my little Surf Prep sander with some 80 grit sandpaper to grind away this faux wood grain and the brown primer that's underneath it. And then I sanded all of the finish off of the drawer fronts and cleaned up any paint mess that was on the sides. Once I had these down to the bare wood, I covered the insides of the hardware holes with just a little piece of painter's tape and then filled them in along with all those tiny nail holes with some of this DAP color changing wood filler. It goes on pink and dries to a natural color, but I don't really love this product, if I'm being honest. I'm not even sure why I have this little pot, but I need to use it up before it dries out on me, so it's gonna have to do. This stuff says it's non-shrinking, but it does shrink up a bit as it dries, so I made sure to really pack it down into these holes. But I did need to come back after about 30 minutes and apply a little bit more where it had sunken in. While that continued drying, I moved on to sanding the body of the piece. These sides are the same faux wood finish over brown primer, but they're over hardboard instead of the wood that's on the drawer fronts. And I'm just using my Orbital sander with some 80 grit again on here to blast through all of this paint. I did end up with a lot of that Behr board exposed, but that's nothing that my primer won't be able to handle in a little bit. If this paint job had been a little smoother or better adhered, I could have just scuff sanded it like I do on any factory finishes, but that just wasn't going to cut it here. I picked up a small 2 foot by 4 foot sheet of 3/4 inch birch plywood and had Doug cut it down on the table saw so it would be flush with the sides of the dresser. Instead of having the same overhang that the original top had, I refused to get near our table saw. And if you're also not into making these kinds of cuts, you can do the same thing with a circular saw and a straight edge, or even just get Home Depot to cut it for you. I lined up my new top and then screwed it back on with the same screws, but since it was so hard to get my drill in there and get good leverage, I ended up grabbing this super long bit from my pocket hole kit, and that made my life so much easier. Now I just have the tiniest lip on either side of the top, so I grabbed my sander again and just removed enough material on both sides so they were perfectly flush. And then I ended up mixing up some Bondo to fill in that layered plywood texture on the exposed sides. I could have used the same filler as the drawers, but like I said, I don't like that stuff. It doesn't sand down particularly smooth, and I should have just used this Bondo on the drawer fronts for those hardware holes too and skipped the pink stuff altogether, but this is where we are now. The Bondo was dry enough to sand in about 15 minutes, another benefit of it. So I sanded away all of the excess and then went back to sand the excess filler on those drawers. Since they'd already been sanded with 80 grit to get the old finish off, this time I used some 120 grit, which is coarse enough to handle the filler, but will also start out the smoothing process of the rough wood grain. While I was at Home Depot grabbing my wood for the top, I also picked up a few of these half-round dowels. I want to cut these down and use them to flute the top drawer of this piece. I'd love to do the whole thing, but wood is expensive, and the last time I did it, it took me forever. I measured out the height of the drawer and then used our miter saw to cut down enough of the dowels to fit across it. Then I just laid out some wood glue on the drawer a section at a time and placed down all of my pieces. Once I had all of the dowels in place and straight, I put a few scrap boards across them and clamped them down so that there was some nice even pressure while the glue dried, and then I got myself set up to paint the rest of the dresser. I wiped down all of the surfaces with a damp microfiber cloth to make sure there wasn't any sanding dust on there, and then I loaded up my gravity-fed HVLP pneumatic spray gun with some of this KILZ restoration primer. This is a water-based primer that blocks odors and stains. It provides extra adhesion power when it's needed, but most importantly for me this time, it's going to give me a nice uniform surface to apply my paint color to. It's not recommended to thin this primer, but it's a little too thick for me to get a nice spray, so I did add about an ounce of water to the 8 ounces of primer that I strained into my gun. I put on my respirator and sprayed my first coat of primer. This stuff needs about an hour to dry, and after that amount of time had passed, I got a good look at all of the imperfections that I had missed with my first pass of filler. White primer is great for that. It makes all those little boo-boos stick right out. This time I am using some drywall spackle to fill. Since these are all really shallow marks, I find that this is what works best and sands out nice and smooth. That wood filler that I used in the holes, it tends to just kind of fall out of these little shallow flaws when you sand it. So once I was happy and all of the surfaces looked good and smooth, as good as I could get them, I sprayed on one more coat of primer to seal all of that in. While I waited for layer 2 of primer to dry, I grabbed my Orbital sander and some more coarse 80 grit to grind off any bit of overhang on these dowels on the top and bottom edges of the drawer. I haven't painted anything pink for quite a while, so I grabbed this muted one from Melange called Sophie's Pink out of my cupboard, gave it a really good shake up, and then strained it into my clean gun. I did add a little bit of water to this as well, about the same ratio, 1 ounce of water-ish to about 8 ounces of paint. And then I proceeded to not record the application of the entire first coat of paint. I'm sorry guys, but it looked a lot like the primer coats, only pink. I want to stain the base and this new top drawer, but I am terrible at choosing stain colors. They never look like what I have envisioned when I put them on. I have a bunch of these water-based stains from my faux wood finishes that I did a few videos ago, so I thought I'd test out a few on a scrap piece of dowel. I did a little bit of Golden Pecan and Early American, and neither was quite the look that I had in my head, so I thought maybe I could layer the two to end up somewhere in between. So I brushed on the Golden Pecan, which turned this pine a horrid orange color. And then I put on a layer of Early American over top just to bring in some more brown. I did the same process on the base, and I really liked the way that it looked on that wood, which I think is either elm or maple, but the pine on this drawer, I don't know, it just looks awful. So I decided to leave it for a little bit and just think on it, and I gave my first coat of paint a really light sand just to smooth it out and sprayed on my second coat. Look, I remembered to hit the record button this time. I think the problem I'm having is that I don't like pine wood grain. I mean, it's not too far off from the warm tone that I want, but it's just not right. I remembered that I had a can of toner lacquer in my cupboard, so I thought I'd give that a try on the drawer and the base and see if I could make the two woods match a little bit better and even out the kind of stripy look in the pine. I ended up spraying 3 coats on the drawer and 2 coats on the base, and then I was pretty happy with the way that both of them looked. And now that that is sorted out, I'm ready to top coat my paint. I pulled out this Varathane diamond wood finish, which is pretty much my go-to poly sealer, and I gave it a really thorough stir. The sheen component in sealers like this tend to settle to the bottom, so you want to mix them back together really well every time you use the product, but you don't want to add any air bubbles to your top coat, so you've got to stir it really gently for a little while. You cannot shake it up. Again, I cleaned out my gun and filled it with about 8 ounces, which will definitely be enough for 2 coats of top coat on this piece. And I did also turn down the flow on my gun, so not as much of this product is coming through. This is a lot thinner than my paint, so if I don't adjust it, I'll get way too much top coat coming out and end up with tons of drips and sags. After I'd sprayed my second coat, I left everything to dry overnight, and the next morning I flipped the body over again onto a towel so that I could reattach the base to the frame. Before I could put the drawers back in, I needed to replace these 2 missing guide pieces. These keep the drawer bottom from rubbing against the wood frame, and I've got a ton of these left over. They come in a kit with the nylon drawer guides that go on the back of the drawers. I nailed these in, and then I tested out my drawers. I decided to lay the whole chest on its back to measure out where I needed to drill holes for my new hardware, and then I measured and mapped all of that out on some painter's tape. I always have some of these little knobs from Amazon on hand because they work with so many different styles, and I just think they're a great fit for this piece. The last thing I did was just touch up a few edges on the drawers where my spray didn't reach, and then this one was all finished up and ready to pass on to its next owners. I found this chest in the trash. I've got about $100 in materials invested into it, and it's something I'd list for sale for between $350 and $400 now. I don't sell these flips anymore, so this one will be given away to someone locally who can put it to good use. But I hope that this makeover gave you some inspiration for your own projects. If you want to see some more epic furniture makeovers, check out this video next, and I will catch you all next time.